Biblical Interp students. We are unfortunately unable to get to this subject I want to talk about here in our class on Tuesday night, and because this coming Tuesday I have a meeting that I need to be at. We're going to have a shortened class, so I want to do this a little bit differently. We're going to just link this video for you, and I want to give you a question that after this study I hope you'll be able to come and discuss with me, and that is, what is faith? We use that word so lightly as Christians. We use it all the time. But when I say that somebody has strong faith, what do I mean? What is this thing we call faith? Is it an intellectual knowledge? Is it a feeling? Is it what? I would be surprised if you have a really clear, strong definition of that word coming into this class. Very few people do. And I've known serious theologians who have struggled to articulate exactly what faith is. And so I'm going to take a moment today using the Gospel according to John, and let's talk a little bit about that word. So we want to start with the Gospel of John, and we're going to actually start at the end of the book in chapter 20. This is the resurrection chapter of John, in which Jesus rises from the dead. He appears to Mary Magdalene at the beginning of the chapter. And there's an important element to that I want to draw your attention to. If you remember the story as John tells it, the women come out to the tomb. They come back and tell the disciples that the tomb is empty and that they've heard that Jesus is risen. Peter and John go running out there. John arrives first, Peter shortly thereafter, but Peter goes in. They discover that the tomb is empty, and it says they believe, and then they leave. But these louts apparently just walk right by Mary Magdalene, who is standing outside the tomb weeping. And she's standing there in tears. This is when Jesus shows up. Initially, she thinks that he is a gardener. "Don't hang on to me," he says. But when he says to her, "Mary," suddenly she recognizes who he is, and she falls at his feet and she grabs a hold of him. And that's where he says, "Don't hang on to me. I have not yet returned to my Father." So you get this picture in a sense of Jesus having risen from the dead. He's on his way back to his rightful place at the throne of God, and yet now suddenly he has taken a detour. And the occasion for his detour are the tears of Mary, that he is pulled toward them. Then we have the story of Thomas. Jesus appears that night to the 10 disciples at this point. Judas is presumably not there, but Thomas also is not there, but 10 of them are gathered. Jesus shows up, he says, "Peace be with you." He shows them his hands and his side. They rejoice, and he commissions them to be the forgivers of sins. They immediately rush out and tell Thomas, who wasn't there. And Thomas reacts with disbelief. We oftentimes call him Doubting Thomas, but that's not really what he does. He just flat out doesn't believe them. He says, "Unless I put my finger into the holes where the nails were and my hand into the side where the spear went in, I'm not going to believe you that you really saw Jesus alive. I think you saw somebody else. Or you saw perhaps a spirit, a ghost of Jesus." Thomas disbelieves the resurrection from the dead. A week later, they're gathered in the tomb, in the upper room again, and here comes Jesus. Now, we need to probably make a little note here. John's real clear. It isn't that Jesus passes through the walls or something like that. He just appears. And the presumption there is that he's been there the whole time. And in fact, you get this because immediately he walks up to Thomas and he says, look, Thomas, see my hand, see my side, put your finger here. Stop doubting and believe. Stop disbelieving, but believe, he says. Notice nobody had to tell Jesus this. Jesus was there the whole time. He was there when they told Thomas. He was there when Thomas disbelieved him and them. Thomas has been there the whole time. Or Jesus has been there the whole time, excuse me. And so Thomas falls to his feet, to his knees, and he says, my Lord and my God. And Jesus says, you believe now that you have seen? And then John has Jesus sort of break the fourth wall in theater terms. He has sort of Jesus turn right to the camera and look at you, and he says, blessed are all of you who have believed without seeing. Okay, that brings us up to verse 29. Jesus has spoken to you. Blessed are you who believe without seeing. You have a blessing Thomas doesn't get now. It's these last two words of the text, last two verses, that we want to take a little extra attention to. Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. This is a really interesting thing for John to say. Jesus did a whole bunch of miracles. I'm not telling you about those. I don't know. Maybe it's because he realizes Matthew, Mark, and Luke have already been written, and he has read them, and he says, I don't need to tell that again. They told that story rather well. But he doesn't quite say that. He just says, I'm not telling you about a whole bunch of stuff Jesus did. But these things that I'm telling you, these signs that I have given you, are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, as Thomas has just confessed it, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Right here, we need to take a little bit of a verbal linguistic excursus at the text. English does its, as we noted on Tuesday night, has a fundamental deficit. Normally, English has way more words than Greek does. The Oxford English Dictionary, if they would still publish it, would take up something like 12 feet of shelf space. They don't publish it anymore. It's only available online. An entire, the authoritative Greek lexicon, which lists every Greek word, is a big book, admittedly, but it's only, about that thick. English just has far, far more words than Greek does. But here's an instance where Greek actually has a word that English doesn't. And that is a verbal form of the word faith. You can faith in Greek. We have another word called believe, which is connected to the noun belief. But a belief and faith are different things. And so too is to believe and to faith. They're kind of different things. And when Greek uses that word to faith, it means something different than the English word to believe. Unfortunately, our English translators are hampered. We don't have that to faith word in English. And so they always use the word to believe. So what I need you to do right away is, from the beginning, just almost in your head, remember that when in the Bible it uses the word believe as a verb, he believed in God or he believes in this, they almost always mean to faith in this. And that word's difference means this is a whole trust. This is a committing of yourself to this whole thing. This is the truth, and this governs me. Martin Luther used a really interesting example of the way to tell the difference. And he talked about, going down to the dock in a harbor. And remember, he lived in a time before airplanes and things like that. People moved around by ships. And he says, to believe something is to hear somebody tell you, that ship over there, that one is going to London. But it's to believe it is to say that that's actually going to happen. To faith it is to buy a ticket and get on the boat and to entrust yourself to the captain and the crew, that they will take you through the ocean with all of its waves and storms and all of those things, and they're gonna bring you to that place you want to go. That is to faith. I can believe something and it doesn't make a difference to me. Or it isn't necessarily something that is so important to me. And this is, we see this a lot of times today. Do you believe that there is a God? Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but does it make a difference? To faith God, and when I say have faith, that turns it into something that I have. No, faith is me. When I faith in God, when I faith in Jesus, I'm really saying, Jesus, you are the answer to all of my biggest questions. My life has no meaning without you. I will die and be empty and forgotten forever. But you can solve that. That's why resurrection is so important to this. To faith in God is to believe that when you die, that's not the end of the story. To faith God is to say, God, you are the answer to my death problem. It's much more encompassing than the word believe. But, as we note, we're stuck with this word believe in here. John has given us a really important clue to what is his book for, and I think indeed what the whole Bible is for. These words have been written so that you may faith in God. Now, think about what that means in terms of what it means to be a Christian. This means that, and to read this book, I'm now reading this book because it is helping me. It is giving it so that it is an instrument by which I can faith in God. That means it's not a science book. It's not a history book. It's not just a collection of stories. It is so much more, although it will use all of those genres. But it's doing something different. For our discussion on Tuesday, I really want you to think about what it is that this goal of the book does to me as a reader. How does that change the way that I would read this book? It's here to give me faith, so that I faith in God. We come now to the beginning of the Gospel according to John, its first chapter, where John has a most delightful opening sequence. We usually call this the prologue of John. It's verses 1 through 18. You're probably very familiar with its opening words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Already in the opening words, John has used very simple language, and this is one of the characteristics of this book. He uses very simple language, almost kind of Dr. Seuss-like, one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish kind of stuff. He doesn't use long words, but the way he arranges them is really profound. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He seems to have said two different things there, and yet he asserts both of them are true. He goes on through this whole thing to say that the Word is the source of all creation. The Word was in the beginning. There is no time when the Word was not. He calls it light. That light has come into the world. Some people don't recognize it, but those who do receive him, he gives the right to become the children of God. There's that thing called faith, isn't it? I'm a child of God. And that means when I die, he raises me from the dead because I'm one of his children. Come down to verse 14 quickly. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Word, this God from the beginning, has dwelt among us. Literally in Greek, the word they use is he pitched a tent. He dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. That's a really fascinating word. And we have perceived him. Now John bore witness about him, cried out, "This is he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me." For from Jesus' fullness we have all received grace upon grace. In this fullness of the revelation of Jesus, in this dwelling of Christ among us, we have received grace upon grace, gift upon gift. This is how God does stuff for us. For the law was given through Moses, and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who sits at the Father's side. Jesus has made him known. If you want to see God, if you want to see the object of faith, you look at Jesus. That word, make known, is the same word we use for interpreting the Bible. Jesus has literally exegeted God. That's the word exegesis. This is the word we use when we interpret the Bible. I'm going to exegesis the scriptures. John arranges his book then into a telling of 7 signs. That's followed by what's oftentimes called the book of love, starting in chapter 12. But we're going to focus on the signs that Jesus does. That John arranges these into signs. You're supposed to read them. The first of them is the wedding of Cana. This is when he turns water into wine. And at the end of that, it says, the disciples saw the sign and they faithed in Jesus. That's what's supposed to happen when you see the sign. You faith in Jesus. But now we want to turn to chapter 9 of John. John's words are oftentimes very simple in this book. He's not a writer who uses big, long, technical language. But don't be deceived by that. John is an incredibly sophisticated writer. In chapter 9, he tells a story, and he uses a genre of literature called drama. It's essentially a play. In the ancient world, plays always followed certain rules, one of which was that there were only ever 2 or 3 speaking characters on the stage. In fact, when you went to one of those old Greek tragedies, there were only 3 actors. They just all took different parts. They would put on a different mask, and they would play that different part, but they would always play there would only be 3 actors who ever acted in one of those plays. There might be a group who would show up, and these would be the chorus. And this is also going to show up in here. But they would have a single person speak for them. So there really still be only one speaker. The chorus sort of acted as a unit. We start off with the chorus, the disciples, and Jesus, and a blind man. The chorus poses a question to Jesus. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus says, you don't know what you're talking about. This all happened that the glory of God may be shown. I am the light of the world, he says. While it's light, do the stuff, because darkness comes. So Jesus he spits on the ground, he picks up the mud that's created by that spittle on the ground, and he rubs it upon the eyes of the man. And he says, go to the pool of Siloam, which we, by the way, have found. You can find pictures of that. Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. The blind man does this, and he comes back able to see. He's been given his eyes are functioning. Well, now we have this just series of ridiculous scenarios, and John is doing this play in a way. He's using a device called comedic irony. You, as the reader, know way more than the people on the stage know. And this produces comedic value, comedic reaction from people. And so you know what's happened with the blind guy, but nobody else does. So he comes back. And his neighbors, who had seen him before begging because he was blind, said, hey, isn't that the guy who used to be blind? And they go, no, it can't be him. Well, it is him. And he's going, no, it's me, it really is me. And they say, well, how'd you get your sight back? And he says, well, this guy named Jesus rubbed mud on my eyes, and I went and washed it off, and now I can see. Well, this gets the attention of the religious authorities because it's a miracle. The Pharisees are brought to the man. Now, it was the Sabbath day when Jesus had made mud and opened his eyes. You're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath, and making mud is, well, work. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, well, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man cannot be from God, for he doesn't keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division between them. And so they turned to the blind guy. And they say, well, what do you say about him? You're the one who had an encounter with him. He opened your eyes. And the man said, he's a prophet. Clearly, he's from God. He's a prophet. He opened my eyes. Well, they didn't believe him. And so they brought in his parents. They needed to ascertain, is he really the same guy? So they bring in his parents who are afraid at this point. They've been hauled in front of the religious authorities. And they say, well, this is our son. How he came to have vision right now, we don't know. Ask him, he's an adult. And so they turned to him again and they said, well, tell us again, how is it that you got your sight? And he said, this is really amazing. You want to hear this story again? I mean, do you want to become his disciples? I mean, you want to hear the stories you want to hear stories repeated when you're really interested in them. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to be his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple. We are the disciples of Moses. But as for this man, we don't know where he comes from. The man answered them, why this is an amazing thing. You don't know where he comes from? We all know that God doesn't listen to sinners. He opened my eyes. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God does listen to him. He opened my eyes. Never since the world began has it been heard of anyone opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man weren't from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, "You were born in utter sin, and you would teach us?" They kicked him out. You should by now be noticing something. The Pharisees, the neighbors, even the parents, yeah, even the disciples, they're all kind of blind in this story. And their blindness keeps getting more and more intense. But the blind guy, the guy whose eyes Jesus opened, his vision is getting clearer and clearer. Notice how at the beginning he said, "Well, this man, Jesus, did this for me." And then they said, "Well, who is he?" "Well, I think he's a prophet." And then they said, "Well, no, what do you mean?" And he said, "No, he's from God." I'll read this last little section. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you faith in the Son of Man?" But he answered him, "Who is he, sir, that I may faith in him? I can't recognize him." Because remember, the last time Jesus saw this guy, his eyes didn't work. Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." And he said, "Lord, I faith." And he worshiped him. Here's another vocabulary item we need to address. This word they use for worship is face to the ground adoration worship. If you think about Muslims at prayer, that's the picture. For a Jewish person, this is something you only do before God. You never give this kind of worship to anything other than God. That's idolatry. That's breaking the first commandment. When this man does this, he is now saying something by his actions that is really important and profound. Jesus is God. You remember, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, the Word dwelt among us. He is the revelation of God. The blind man sees it. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we blind?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." For Tuesday night, we're going to start off with a discussion of what is faith? What is this thing we do, this faithing, this whole self that is a thing? Because if we're going to really read our Bibles, if we're going to actually interpret them, we have to know that this is what it's trying to do. It's not trying to make me into a more moral person. It's not trying to make me into a keeper of the rules or the laws. It's not trying to make me into somebody who knows something, at least maybe not the way we think about that. It's trying to make me into a person who faiths. What do you believe that means? What is that? Can you explain it? Because I think if you're going to be an interpreter of the Bible, you should be able to. I look forward to that discussion. We'll see you guys Tuesday. We're going to start at 7:30, unless you hear differently from me via email. But right now, that's the game plan. 7:30 Tuesday night. God bless you. Bye-bye.